After battling with the demons from hell for over a decade, the strongest mage, Inchikami, finally defeats the demon god, but at the cost of his own life. Yet even the afterlife couldn't hold this absolute menace. Somehow, 50 years later, Inchikami found a way to be reborn in the body of the weakest, most bullied student in a magical academy who would certainly lose a one-on-one against Magikarp. It all started in Japan in 1970, in a city that had been completely destroyed, almost like Thanos snapped twice. In Tokyo, some group of low-level mages battled against a ferocious fire-breathing monster with a blue crystal on his chest. However, despite their best efforts, these mages were shocked to realize that their attacks didn't even leave a single scratch on the beast. As the tension mounted, the monsters increased in numbers and began advancing toward them with the clear intent of sending them to meet Kobe. Overwhelmed with terror, the mages stood frozen. In that dire moment, the creature unleashed a fiery attack so intense it could roast even the devil himself. Just as all hope seemed lost, and the mages were about to say their last prayers, a miracle occurred. Suddenly, before their eyes stood Ikikami, the strongest mage, glowing with a bright aura. At the sight of him, the mages couldn't believe their eyes. However, Ikikami simply turned to them and, with a reassuring smile, commended their efforts. Then, he immediately ordered them to retreat and leave the fight to him. Once the mages were gone, Ikikami stood tall, ready to face the monsters alone. He walked straight into the midst of the monsters without a single iota of fear. Provoked by his confidence, the monsters immediately attacked. In response, Ikikami sidestepped and counterattacked with a powerful purple mystic energy blast. Then, with unshakable determination, he smiled and taunted the monsters, daring them to give it their best shot. You see, to fully understand the gravity of this moment, it's important to revisit how the fierce battle between monsters and humans began. It all started one fateful day when a large number of monsters suddenly appeared, an event now called the Great Calamity. In their desperation to fight back, humans relied on AK-47s and a variety of advanced weaponry, but their efforts were useless. After enduring countless struggles and bloodshed, humanity finally opened its eyes to a new possibility of using magic as a weapon instead of metals. From that moment on, magic became the sole means of combating these freaky monsters, thus birthing a battle that raged on for over a decade. Back in the present, Ikikami looked up and noticed that the demon god himself had emerged, ready to settle this long battle once and for all. At the sight of the all-powerful boss of the calamity, Ikikami was momentarily stunned. He had never expected the demon god to show up. Wasting no time, the demon boss unleashed a massive fiery blast aimed directly at Ikikami. However, our hero managed to create a shield just in time, deflecting the devastating attack. It was at that moment Ikikami realized the demon god was using a 14th level magic attack, one that involved summoning 14 magical circles simultaneously, a feat of unimaginable power. Determined not to back down, Ikikami retaliated with a powerful electric blast, causing a massive explosion that could be seen even in space. However, despite his best efforts, the sheer force of the blast sent him crashing to the ground, wounded and vulnerable. As he struggled to rise, Ikikami saw the demon god summoning a dark, mystical energy that radiated an ominous power. It was at that moment that Ikikami knew this wasn't just any fight. This was the fight. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Ikikami knew if he'd walk out alive, he would have to stop holding back and go full shonen protagonist. Amidst a powerful burst of electric surge, Ikikami unleashed his Kurama chakra mode and traded mystical blasts with the Calamity boss, their attacks shaking the very ground beneath them. You see, to fully grasp the magnitude of Ikikami's power, it's important to note that a mage's strength was determined by their rank and the number of magical circles they could summon. The highest magical circle a demon god could ever summon was 14, but Ikikami, the world's strongest mage, could summon 15. Total Gigachad energy. In that defining moment, Ikikami summoned his highest magical circle, and instantly, the eternal void of emptiness was unveiled. The pressure of the void immediately began to pull in the demon god and his minions. In a blink of an eye, they were all gone, vanishing into the abyss. Ikikami, however, collapsed to the ground, utterly drained after such a powerful move. With every ounce of his energy spent, he knew this was the end. Yet, he was at peace. He was prepared to die as a great sage, believing it was the perfect way to bow out. After all, he had lived a remarkable life and would die a hero. But before Inchikami kicked the bucket, a strange, bright light suddenly appeared. In that inexplicable moment, his soul escaped his body and drifted through the void, traveling across dimensions. Finally, it reached a hospital room, where it entered the body of a wounded patient lying helplessly in a coma. In an instant, the once unconscious patient moved his hand and abruptly jerked back to life. At that very moment, Ikikami was reborn within the patient's body. Disoriented and overwhelmed, he couldn't believe he had somehow managed to survive. Looking around in shock, Ikikami wondered where on earth he was. Hurriedly, he stood before a mirror, only to be horrified by the Asian ninja turtle staring back at him. Who even was this ugly guy? He wondered as his gaze shifted back to the hospital bed, where a name tag read, Kusanagi Minato. While still staring at the mirror in shock, Ikikami heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Moments later, a doctor and nurse entered the room. Without delay, they guided him back to the bed and began unwrapping the bandages covering his body. As the final layer of bandages came off, the doctor froze in disbelief. His eyes widened as he realized the patient's wounds had healed completely. With a trembling voice, the doctor exclaimed that such a recovery was impossible. The patient, who had been left unconscious and severely injured from a terrible car accident, now appeared fully healed, as though by some kind of holy magic. Ikikami immediately asked the doctor about his magical powers and then informed the doctor that during the Great Calamity, he was engaged in a fierce battle with the monsters. Hearing this, the doctor feared that the accident might have damaged the patient's brain cells, so he cautiously asked for the patient's name and the current year. Somewhat puzzled, Ikikami replied, providing his name and confidently stating that the year was 1970. In response, the doctor concluded that the accident might have impaired the patient's memory. So the doctor corrected that his name was Minato and the year was 2022. Hearing this, Ikikami simply stared at them, wondering what the old geezer was rambling about. However, his confusion was interrupted when the TV in the room caught his attention, and as his eyes darted across the room, he also noticed a calendar on the table confirming that the year was indeed 2022. Shocked by this revelation, Ikikami immediately asked what had happened to the monsters. In a calm tone, the doctor explained that the monsters had drastically reduced over the years, and the world was now peaceful. A few weeks later, Ikikami was discharged from the hospital and returned to Minato's room. While flipping through the pages of a book inside the room, he came across the revelation that Minato's parents had passed away when he was just a child. Furthermore, he discovered that Minato had been kicked out by his foster parent and sent to a boarding school. From that point on, Minato relied solely on his late parents' inheritance to survive. As Ikikami relaxed on the bed, his eyes fell on a strange ID. Upon closer inspection, he realized it identified Minato as a student of the Kamui Magic Academy. Just then, the phone inside the bag he'd brought back from the hospital vibrated. Pulling it out, he noticed an incoming call from someone named Tanato. Confused and unsure what to do with the vibrating object, Ikikami shrugged and tossed the phone onto the floor. By the following morning, Ikikami, dressed as a student, found himself standing at the gates of the Kamui Magic Academy, ready to embrace a fresh start as Minato. The thought of attending school as a student filled him with excitement, setting his heart racing. However, as he made his way inside, his attention was quickly drawn to a random loser in the courtyard. The boy, with fierce determination, summoned a magical circle and unleashed a fiery blast at the target. Inchikami, on the other hand, watched with a dissatisfied expression, silently wondering what in the world the Harry Potter from Temu was even doing. The sight left him stunned. He could hardly believe magic practice and training had fallen off this much over the years. Eventually, Ikikami made his way to his assigned class, labeled 2A. Stepping inside, he settled into a chair, excitement bubbling within him as he wondered what the day might hold. Also, he wondered if Minato even had any friends. Suddenly, the door burst open, and 3 ugly mofos stormed into the classroom. The head honcho of the misfit squad, some raggedy orange-haired menace rocking a ketchup haircut, demanded to know why Minato ghosted his call. Confused and clueless, Inchikami simply asked who he was. The question seemed to strike a nerve because the clown went from 0 to aggressive real quick. Infuriated, he kicked the desk in front of Inchikami, yelled that his name was Tanato, and then called Inchikami an ugly, useless piece of trash. Hearing the name Tanato, Inchikami's brain finally clicked. This was the same guy who'd been calling Minato's phone earlier. Inchikami assumed he must be one of Minato's friends, so he decided to play it cool. He reached out, shook Tanato's hand, and insisted that, as homeboys, they should get along. However, Tanato immediately yanked Inchikami's hand away like he had cooties, grabbed him by the collar, and then demanded money since Minato should be loaded after inheriting his parents' money. At that point, Inchikami figured Minato must have been bullied by this bunch of useless goons. Sensing Inchikami's silence, Minato attacked with his fist, clearly intending to make Inchikami smell how cold it was. However, before things could escalate, the classroom door swung open, and in walked a blue-haired baddie who stepped in like some big shot celebrity. Seeing her, Minato immediately switched gears like the ultimate simp, released Inchikami from his grip and walked over to her, likely hoping to score some Riz points. Fast forward a few hours, and the class for the day finally commenced. The teacher delved straight into a history lesson on the Great Calamity, and then detailed the heroic sacrifice made by the great hero to save humanity from the demon god. Midway through, the teacher asked the class if anyone could talk about the legendary hero Inchikami. Without hesitation, the blue-haired girl shot her hand up like she was about to touch the ceiling. The teacher noticed her, addressed her as Mizuha, and gestured for her to answer. Mizuha confidently explained that Inchikami was the first magician, the sole survivor of the first calamity, and the hero on whose name the Great Magic Academy was built. However, at that very moment, Inchikami himself sat nervously, wishing the class would just end and hoping not to hear another word about himself. While lost in thought, he recalled the doctor's words, reminding him that the world was now at peace. This realization led him to suspect that it was the reason magicians had suddenly become weaker than Hogwarts rejects. Just then, the bell rang, bringing the class to an end, and as the teacher left the class, he reminded the students about the magic assessment the next day. Just as the teacher left, Minato slammed Inchikami's desk and told him that he would love to see nothing more than his garbage magical powers at the magic assessment. Despite the provocation, Inchikami ignored his roach face and started to leave. This blatant dismissal, however, only infuriated Minato further. In frustration, he shouted after Inchikami, calling him an orphan whose father treated him like a trial subscription and bursting into mocking laughter. In response, Inchikami stopped and called Minato an unfed chihuahua. This insult instantly pushed Minato into a fit of rage. Unable to contain his anger, Minato immediately activated his magical circle and unleashed a hellish inferno. As chaos erupted, the rest of the students screamed in horror, reminding the untrained brat that magic was strictly prohibited in the classroom. By that point, however, it was too late. Minato had already blasted Inchikami with a massive whirlwind of fire. Frightened by the scene, Mizuha freaked out, insisting that magic shouldn't be used over such a small quarrel and warning that someone could get seriously hurt. In response, Minato scoffed and retorted that he wasn't to be blamed but Ikikami, the ugly imp who had provoked the fight. Shortly after, the massive fire began to dissipate, leaving the entire classroom shrouded in thick smoke. To everyone's amazement, a figure stood standing in the haze. Standing confidently, Inchikami emerged with one hand casually tucked into his pocket, completely unharmed. The sight left everyone stunned. Mizuha and the rest of the students stared in disbelief, their eyes wide with shock. Even Minato and his goons froze in shock, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Remarkably, not even a single strand of Inchikami's hair was burnt. Meanwhile, Inchikami stared at them, fully aware that with such a level 1 attack, his magical barrier could easily protect him. In that tense moment, Inchikami reflected inwardly, reasoning that he had tolerated such an attack because he viewed Minato as a child. However, even a child, he thought, must be punished when they crossed the line. At that instant, Inchikami began to glow with an immense aura, and the entire classroom was suddenly filled with flying, glowing particles. Terrified, the students immediately began complaining that they couldn't move, their voices filled with panic. Mizuha, gripped by fear, silently wondered what kind of magic Inchikami could possibly be using. As the aura intensified, Inchikami started to move toward Minato. Frozen in terror, Minato shook uncontrollably, trembling like a scared little girl with PTSD. Without hesitation, Inchikami stretched his hand over Minato's terrified face, clearly intending to deliver his punishment. But just then, the classroom door swung open, and a teacher entered, demanding to know what all the commotion was about and questioning whether someone was using magic in class. Letting out a sigh, Inchikami immediately allowed the immense aura to dissipate. With a feigned smile, Inchikami turned to the teacher and calmly explained that nothing was happening. He also lied, saying it must have been some random student from another class dabbling in magic. When the teacher pressed further, asking about the smoke, Inchikami made it abundantly clear that it must have come from outside the school. Despite his explanations, the teacher vowed to find the worthless bum responsible for using magic on school grounds. Meanwhile, Mizuha couldn't stop staring at Inchikami. clearly impressed with everything she had seen. At the same time, Tanado fumed in silence after being served a hot plate of humiliation by Inchikami. Meanwhile, with everything Inchikami had witnessed, he couldn't help but think how absolute trash the students of the school magic were. With such pathetic abilities, these wannabe mages couldn't even swat a fly, let alone take down a monster, and surely, there had to be monsters lurking around somewhere. Determined to confirm his suspicions, Inchikami decided it would be best to check the city for any signs of lurking monsters. So later that night, at the old Shibuya site, our protagonist dressed like a discount spy and flexing levitation magic like Doctor Strange, calmly observed the surroundings. Despite scanning the area, he couldn't sense the presence of any monsters. The place was in ruins, but it seemed the police had taken care of every last monster in the vicinity. Just as he began to think it might be a wasted trip, Inchikami suddenly sensed the presence of a monster nearby and, to his surprise, a human as well. Without hesitation, he charged deeper into the site, still standing atop his levitation circle. Shockingly, he stumbled upon a towering monster looming over a frightened girl. The monster was seconds away from making her his midnight snack, but in an instant, Inchikami intervened and pulverized the monster into oblivion. With the threat eliminated, Inchikami side-eyed the terrified girl and immediately noticed the police magician badge on her shirt, leaving him momentarily surprised. He turned and was about leaving, but not without issuing the girl a sharp warning to be more careful next time. The girl, still looking like a deer in front of headlights, managed to stammer out a thank you for saving her life. As Inchikami walked away, the girl couldn't help but wonder who this mysterious Sigma was. She quickly concluded that he must be a powerful mage, given how effortlessly he obliterated the monster without chanting a single spell. Meanwhile, Inchikami, lost in thought, mulled over the encounter. The fact that the girl was a magic cop, yet had almost been eaten like sushi by the monster only confirmed his suspicions. The magicians of this era were hopelessly weak. By the looks of it, even at this time, they would undoubtedly need his power to survive. The day of the magic assessment finally arrived. The teacher, standing beside a machine that looked like it was borrowed from Jimmy Neutron's lab, announced to the students that the device would measure their magic levels. At that moment, Mizuha suddenly approached Inchikami, requesting to have a word with him. Seeing the school's renowned beauty talking to a sore loser like Inchikami, the students were left stunned. They couldn't help but wonder what in the world the school idol could possibly want with the disgraceful piece of trash. On the other hand, Mizuha formally introduced herself and smugly mentioned that she was the second daughter of the prestigious Yuika magic noble house. However, Inchikami, looking thoroughly confused, demanded to know what a magic noble was. Annoyed by his ignorance, Mizuha raised her voice and exclaimed that magic noble houses were the heads of all magicians. Even so, Inchikami reasoned that such a thing never existed back in his time. After pausing momentarily, Inchikami scanned Mizuha's magic energy level and was shocked to find it weak, even for someone from a magic noble house. Noticing his awkward, judgmental stare, Mizuha grew angry, wondering why Inchikami stood there gawking at her like a half-brained dummy instead of saying anything, especially after she lowered herself to talk to someone as worthless as him. Finally, after a brief moment of silence, Inchikami inquired what business a magic noble like her has to do with him. His tone carried a trace of arrogance, which only made Mizuha even more annoyed. However, she took a deep breath to stay calm, reassuring herself that all she wanted was to find out how he had managed to remain completely unscathed after being attacked by Tanado. Just as she was about to ask the question, the teacher interrupted, loudly announcing the start of the assessment. Sensing an opportunity to escape the conversation, Inchikami quickly pointed out that it was time to get measured, and then walked off, leaving Mizuha seething. Nevertheless, in her thoughts, she resolved that one way or another, she would witness his true power during the assessment. The first student to be assessed was Tanado, and proudly, he walked straight to the machine, ready to show his immense power. As he placed his hand on the device, it began to glow. Suddenly, flames erupted from his palm, and the machine declared his attribute to be fire with a score of 1,000 points, which made him smile in satisfaction. Following him was Mizuha. Exuding a blue aura, she strutted like an arrogant Barbie to the machine. Upon placing her hand on the device, bubbles of liquid materialized, and the machine announced her attribute as water, awarding her an astounding score of 2,000 points. Witnessing the remarkable scores of both Tanado and Mizuha, the other students couldn't stop praising them, hailing them as the top performers of the class and fantastic magicians. However, our boy looked utterly dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that with a score of 2,000, Mizuha was being celebrated by the pathetic clowns as the top student. Back in his day, that was JV level at best. Mizuha, meanwhile, turned her attention to Inchikami. In her Delulu brain, she was confident in the exceptional feat she had just pulled. When Inchikami's name was called, murmurs rippled through the crowd. The background was filled with gossip about how he had flopped during the previous assessment. Tanado smirked, betting his whole ego on seeing Inchikami crash and embarrass himself once again. At the same time, Mizuha smiled sheepishly, convinced that there was no way in hell Inchikami's score could even come close to hers. Unbothered by their opinions, Inchikami walked steadily toward the machine, contemplating whether he should hold back his power a little. But as he overheard the students' low expectations for him, he decided to flex just a bit. The moment he placed his hand on the machine, a massive surge of electricity coursed through it, overwhelming its capacity. Instantly, a powerful blast rocked the academy, triggering a massive explosion. The students scrambled to shield themselves from the smoke and couldn't believe what was happening before their eyes. However, with his hands tucked in his pockets, Inchikami stood amidst the chaos like a true protagonist, visibly displeased that the scrappy machine had exploded just as he was about to truly get started. Just then, the teacher, panicking, asked if everyone was okay. The students quickly affirmed that they were unharmed. Turning to Inchikami, the gray-haired man asked if he was all right, noting that he had been right in the middle of the explosion, to which Inchikami said he was okay. As the teacher's gaze shifted to the shattered remains of the machine, he commented that it was the first time he had ever seen a measuring device get destroyed in such a manner. Placing his hand on his chin, the teacher wondered aloud if the machine had been defective all along. After a brief pause, the teacher returned to Inchikami and explained that, with the machine destroyed, there was no way to determine his magic power or attribute, which were crucial for assigning him to a combat class. Glancing toward Tanado, the teacher suggested that Inchikami could temporarily join his group. Hearing this, Tanado and his ugly lackeys exchanged amused glances, their faces lighting up in delight. Smirking, Tanado replied that he had no problem with the arrangement. Then, Tanado strolled to Inchikami, casually brushing off his shoulders, and with a teasing grin, he jokingly remarked that he'd be looking forward to working with Inchikami. The scene shifts to the old Shibuya site. You see, even after the great calamity of 50 years ago, some monsters still inhabit areas that remain severely destroyed. For instance, the Shibuya site has become a regular monster hotspot, often used by magicians and the police for practice runs. With this in mind, the teacher announced a practical class where students would work in groups to take down a few weak monsters as part of their test. However, Inchikami questioned why monsters were still present at the site. The last time he was there, he had ensured that most of them were eliminated. This led him to wonder if the sudden reappearance of monsters could be a warning of an impending disaster. Soon enough, the teacher officially began the practical class, emphasizing the importance of teamwork. Inchikami, on the other hand, seemed uninterested. He tucked his hands into his pockets and leaned casually against the wall. At that moment, Tanado and his bunch of bozos approached Inchikami, warning him to stay out of their way. Inchikami responded coolly, advising them to ignore him altogether since it was clear they didn't like him. Tanado, however, was immediately irritated and warned Inchikami not to talk back while he talked. He went on to insult Inchikami, calling him useless orphan and questioning why Mizuha seemed to be drawn to his skibidi riz. Unfazed, Inchikami retorted with a smirk and said Mizuha was into him because he had a massive load in between his thighs compared to Tanado's baby straw. This comment sent Tanado into a furious rage, prompting him to activate his fire magic with the intent of frying Inchikami to a crisp. Calmly, Inchikami advised him not to waste his magic since he would need it for what was behind him. Initially dismissing the warning as cap, Tanado reluctantly turned around, only to freeze in terror at the sight of a giant horned monster standing ominously behind him. The monster's appearance caused Tanado and his lackeys to panic. In desperation, Tanado's psychos begged him to prove his worth as their leader and save them. Not wanting to appear incompetent, Tanado immediately activated his fire magic again and hurled it at the monster. However, his attack was utterly useless, barely doing anything more than massaging the monster's body. Realizing his magic was ineffective, Tanado's expression shifted to one of visible terror. Meanwhile, Inchikami remained leaned against the wall, fully aware that a mere level 1 magic could never take down a demon soldier of this caliber. At that moment, the monster began to advance towards them, making Tanado and his spineless sisses tremble. Out of pure fear, they stumbled on the ground as they could already see their entire life flash before their eyes. Tanado's eyes and mouth were leaking worse than a broken faucet, and knowing his end had come, he peed hot liquid on his pants. Suddenly, the monster lunged forward with its giant claw, aiming to rip off Tanado's head. But just as it was about to strike, Inchikami began to emit a bright, terrifying, magical aura. Upon sensing this, the monster hesitated and slowly retreated. Inchikami then casually strolled to the front, and instantly, the intensity of the magical aura grew even stronger. Without wasting a second, Inchikami activated a magical circle while Tanado and his goons watched in absolute terror. In that instant, Inchikami unleashed a level 2 magic, Rock Break, hurling a massive fiery rock at the monster. He quickly followed up with a level 1 magic, Fire Arrow, which triggered a tremendous hellstorm, obliterating the creature without a trace. Tanado, utterly baffled, couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. He was stunned that the school's resident loser, Inchikami, had just pulled Tanjiro-level Demon Slayer on the monster. Meanwhile, Inchikami, staring at a blue crystal on the ground, was more focused on the strange appearance of a demon soldier in Shibuya. Despite having already eradicated many of the monsters, they continued to appear, which seemed highly suspicious. Concerned, Inchikami wondered if this was some kind of ominous sign before a disaster, and he began to realize that he might have underestimated the gravity of the monster situation in recent times. As he reflected, a flashback of the great calamity from years ago hit him. He remembered how countless lives were lost, children left without parents, and he, too, had lost many comrades. Clenching his fist in determination, Inchikami swore that if the calamity were to happen again, he would make sure to save everyone. Meanwhile, Tanado's minions continued to whisper in awe about Inchikami's Demon Slayer feat, only to aggravate Tanado further. His frustration boiled over, and in a fit of anger, he punched the wall like some bratty crybaby throwing tantrums. However, watching the entire scene unfold from behind the building was Mizuha, who observed from her hiding spot. A few minutes before all of this unfolded, Mizuha had used her water magic to eliminate some low-level monsters, impressing her groupmates in the process. However, she wasn't exactly feeling herself. Like, she knew it wasn't that big of a deal. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to Tanado and his hippies, leading Inchikami by the shoulders between the buildings like a child about to receive a beating. Thinking they were going to bully Inchikami, Mizuha left her crackhead group with a promise to return and decided to follow them. Peeking around a corner, she was startled by something. She froze in shock when she saw that a demon soldier had attacked the boys. Afraid of the situation, she considered stepping in to help them, eager to flex her ego in the process. But as she moved, she stopped dead in her tracks when a massive explosion erupted in front of her. It was Inchikami who in that moment had just vanquished the monster. Frozen in disbelief, Mizuha's mind raced. Could it be that the magic she had just witnessed was his? She could bet her left kidney that Inchikami used to be nothing more than a certified loser boy with zero magic game. But what she had just seen was something someone with zero magic couldn't do. Moreover, she hadn't heard him chant anything before casting the spell that obliterated the monster, which left Mizuha even more perplexed. Also, she found it nearly impossible to believe that a level 1 magician could even defeat a demon soldier. You see, in this world, the strength of a demon was determined by the number of crystals it possessed. A rank 6 demon beast had just a single blue crystal. Rank 5 demon soldiers carried 2 blue crystals, while rank 4 demon captains had 3. Rank 3 Shadow Misty Demon Generals boasted 4 blue crystals, and the rank 2 Demon King held 5. Finally, the Goat of Demons, the rank 1 Demon God, was said to possess 6 impressive blue crystals. Still peeking at the boys, Mizuha explained in her thoughts that only a level 3 magician could defeat a demon soldier. It was impossible to defeat a demon soldier with just level 1 magic skills. At that moment, she noticed Inchikami approaching, so she quickly hid. However, our boy already knew the yondir was lurking like a peeping Tom. With a casual remark, Inchikami said it was good Mizuha was close to the wall because she was as flat as the wall. Embarrassed, Mizuha emerged from her hiding spot and demanded to know how he had known she was there. Inchikami calmly replied, saying only a dumb mage wouldn't sense magic close by. With that being said, Inchikami walked ahead of her while Mizuha yelled, demanding an explanation for what he just said. But our boy ignored the yondir with daddy issues, and in a swift Batman move, he was standing atop a nearby building. There, he decided to scan the area for any sign of monsters close by. While scanning, he observed that there were no demon soldiers, but lurking around were low-ranking demon beasts. Concerned, Inchikami realized that with the students' weak magical abilities, they would have a tough time dealing with these low-ranking demons. With that, he decided to help reduce the beast numbers. Spreading his hands, he activated 2 glowing magical circles and then unleashed a magic barret that sent an energy blast all over the Shibuya station. At that moment, a horde of demon beasts were about to devour 2 students. As the monsters charged at the terrified students, the energy blast swept through the beast, obliterating them instantly. Looking down from the building, Inchikami saw that several demon beasts had been eliminated, making him wonder if he had taken the Mr. Nice Guy too far. After the practical class concluded, the students couldn't stop buzzing about the remarkable magic that had wiped out all the demon beasts like stains on dirty dishes. Inchikami, however, remained quietly satisfied that everyone was safe, even Tanado and his lackeys, though their expressions made it clear they weren't happy with how things had turned out. Meanwhile, Mizuha replayed the moment Inchikami had destroyed the demon soldier. The memory lived rent-free in her head, replaying on a loop like her favorite Spotify song. She even began to suspect that Inchikami might have been responsible for the final attack that had nuked the demon beasts. But she quickly shrugged off the thought, reasoning that it was impossible for someone like Inchikami to use 2 magic attributes, fire and spatial. In her mind, such a feat was only possible for incredibly powerful magicians, not a loser. Yet, despite her denial, Inchikami continued to intrigue her. At the same time, Tanado's goons couldn't stop whispering about how Inchikami had effortlessly bodied the demon soldier like it was nothing. Their chatter, however, irritated Tanado to no end. Unable to take it anymore, Tanado snapped, yelling at them to zip their disgusting mouths before he shut them permanently. Fuming, Tanado shouted that there was no way Inchikami could actually be that overpowered. Something about the entire situation smelled fishy, and in his mind, Inchikami had to be cheating just to humiliate him. Tanado doubled down, promising he would get to the bottom of it and expose Inchikami's true character. Later that day, as Inchikami headed home after school, out of nowhere, Tanado and a whole squad of wannabe gangsters jumped in. Tanado smirked, called Inchikami a cheat, and said now Inchikami would become their punching bag. Confused, Inchikami wondered why the dog face was calling him a cheat. But Tanado insisted that there was no way Inchikami could pull off magic like that without using a cheat. With his arms crossed, Tanado declared he'd give Inchikami just one chance to escape. But Inchikami calmly replied that he was no chicken and had no reason to run. This pissed Tanado off, so he raised his fist to launch an attack. He sent his fist straight to Inchikami's face, and the rest of the goons followed suit. Tanado was grinning ear to ear as he and his jobless lackeys rained heavy blows on Inchikami. But unbeknownst to them, our guy had quietly enveloped himself in a magical barrier. Their punches were no more than throwing paper balls at a tank. Inchikami, unfazed, sat on the ground mid-beatdown like he was chilling on a park bench, watching the fools embarrass themselves. Until suddenly, Mizuha arrived, and on seeing her, Tanado and his idiots were forced to stop. Tanado, shocked, tried to save face by lying that they were just having fun like guys, like guys do. But Mizuha wasn't buying his useless, weak sauce lie and insisted that he and his henchmen were nothing but pathetic bullies dogpiling on Inchikami. Irritated, she retorted that she didn't know the academy specialized in breeding trash-tier cowards. Then she doubled down, calling them all spineless beta males for dogpiling on one person like a bunch of weak girls. At those words, Tanado felt embarrassed and couldn't help but think Inchikami was the reason his crush was dragging and roasting the life out of him. After expressing herself, Mizuha took hold of Inchikami's hands, demanding that they leave immediately. As the two walked off holding hands like love birds, something inside Tanado snapped. Logic flew out the window, and rage took over. Without thinking, Tanado and his minions angrily activated their magical circles, summoning a massive burst of flames and hurling it straight at Inchikami and Mizuha. Mizuha froze in shock, her body trembling as she instinctively raised a hand to shield herself from the oncoming inferno. Inchikami, however, just stood there, unfazed by the fiery assault. Once the flames subsided, Tanado stood smug, fully confident that Inchikami couldn't possibly survive, even with his so-called cheat magic. Meanwhile, his lackeys began to panic, nervously wondering if they might have gone too far by taking Inchikami's life. But Tanado, with a reassuring smile, asked them to chill. He explained that they would lie to the school authority that they accidentally used their magic outside school. Things went out of control, and Inchikami was caught in the middle of it all. When the dust finally settled, someone standing in the mist remarked that he might have tolerated them for too long, thinking they were just spoiled brats. Of course, it's Inchikami who firmly declared that, apparently, some stupidity could only be cured by death. Seeing him, Tanato and his goons immediately froze in shock, their faces pale as if they'd just seen a ghost. But despite the fear crawling up their spines, Tanato, consumed by his madness, refused to back down. Rallying his boys, he launched yet another attack. This time, however, Inchikami calmly activated a tiny golden circle, its small size prompting Tanato and his homies to burst out laughing at how small and crappy the magic circle was. But as Tanato and his boys hurled a massive fire at Inchikami, Inchikami revealed his trump card by activating the magic drain. The moment the flames collided with the golden circle, a yellow, glowing green vine shot out like a whip of light. Before they could react, the vine wrapped itself tightly around Tanato and his gang, locking them in place like helpless little flies caught in a spider's web. Panic set in as they struggled, but their efforts were futile. The vine began draining their magic energy with merciless efficiency, leaving them weaker and weaker until, finally, they collapsed to the ground, completely unconscious. Seeing what had just happened, Mizuha was stunned and confused as to why Tanato and his gang were lying helplessly on the ground. As she noticed Inchikami taking his leave, she screamed for him to wait and demanded to know what magic he had used to knock the boys out cold. Before Inchikami could respond, she pressed further, asking who he was. Inchikami, however, found her questions annoying. Turning to leave, he remarked that instead of asking stupid questions, there was something else she should have said. Reluctantly, Mizuha turned her face to the side and said she would give him regards for saving her. Finally, she thanked him. However, to her shock, the boy had houdinied out of there like a ghost in the night, leaving her standing there, half raging, half blushing. Later that night, at the old Shibuya site, Inchikami levitated through the sky. After scanning the area, he realized that a new batch had already respawned even after obliterating all the monsters in that vicinity. He figured it was a sign of a bad omen. Thinking about how to put an end to the monsters once and for all, Inchikami reasoned it would be best to wipe out the monsters first and then come up with a plan. With that resolve, he activated his twin magical circle and unleashed Magic Barret, obliterating the monster beasts within range. Meanwhile, under the glowing moon, a fat drunk happily strolled home after receiving his paycheck. Little did the old fart know, a monster beast was creeping up on him, teeth prepped and ready to serve his head on a platter. At that very moment, Inchikami swooped in and saved drunk Patrick from his VIP ticket to Nirvana. After that, Inchikami hid behind a nearby wall, hoping that no one had seen his little rescue act. However, it was too late. Some yellow-haired dude had already caught the whole thing on camera. Before long, Inchikami, Mizuha, and Tanato were invited into the dean's office. Inside, the gray-haired teacher announced that any student found guilty of using magic outside the school would be expelled. Then, the teacher demanded an explanation for what had transpired. Without hesitation, Tanato quickly argued that it wasn't him or his boys who used magic, but rather Inchikami, who had come looking for trouble. However, before Inchikami could defend himself, a voice suddenly shouted that everything Tanato said was complete BS. It turned out to be a furious Mizuha, who added that Tanato and his friends were the ones who had used magic first while bullying Inchikami. Before she could continue, the gray-haired teacher interrupted and questioned whether Inchikami had also used magic. In response, Mizuha exclaimed that it was purely for self-defense. It wasn't like he had willingly wanted to use it. All the while, Inchikami stood in shock, frozen at the realization that the girl was actually defending him better than Harvey Specter. But Mizuha wasn't done yet. She went on, yelling at Tanato and calling him and his goons weaklings for trying to push the blame onto Inchikami even after they had bullied him. Tanato couldn't hold back anymore and snapped, retorting that Inchikami was trash who wasn't worthy of being a student of the school. He said someone needed to clean up the trash. It might as well be him. With a desolate look, Mizuha immediately clapped back, calling him the real garbage unworthy of the school. Tanato responded by boasting that he was at the top of his class, so naturally, he should be the one seen with a bad chick like her, not Inchikami, the worthless fry. With a face screaming, "Pick me," Tanato begged Mizuha to wake up and not waste her time on a dweeb like Inchikami, but instead be his girl. Coldly, Mizuha shot him down, saying she would rather date a cockroach than his lonely, desperate self. That rejection hit Tanato like a massive surge of electricity, but Mizuha still wasn't done with the humiliation. she scoffed, saying she'd never date a violent bully with zero riz, especially not the only clown dumb enough to shoot his shot while defending himself in the principal's office. Tanado couldn't endure the humiliation any longer and immediately passed out on the spot. Meanwhile, after some thought, the bearded blobfish of a dean finally announced that for using magic for selfish reasons, Tanado and his goons were all expelled. Hearing this, Tanado's two lousy sidekicks immediately fell to their knees, crying and begging for mercy, while Tanado remained unconscious on the floor. At the same time, Inchikami and Mizuha were pardoned and told to return to class. Outside the dean's office, as they returned, Mizuha was still fuming over Tanado's nonsense behavior. However, Inchikami was more concerned and inquired about their fate now that they were expelled. With no care in the world, Mizuha casually explained that it was obvious they would never become mages. Then, out of nowhere, she suddenly turned to Inchikami and demanded that he man up and speak for himself next time. Inchikami sighed, saying he was about to speak up before she hijacked the whole thing. But as he replayed everything in his head, Inchikami realized that Mizuha had defended him twice now. First in class when he had a fight with Tanado earlier, and then again in front of the dean. With a smile of gratitude, Inchikami complimented Mizuha, saying for someone aggressive, she was indeed a sweet girl who would make a perfect wife material. Hearing the compliment, Mizuha instantly blushed, her face turning as red as a baboon's cheeks. Embarrassed, she let out a dramatic huff and immediately ran off like a drama queen. As Inchikami watched her leave, his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He began to wonder if Minato was just bullied to his death. He also questioned the authenticity of the car accident that took Minato's life, if it was just an accident or something far more sinister orchestrated by his tormentors. Either way, Inchikami concluded that Tanado and his lackeys must have been responsible for Minato's death and hoped that their getting expelled would serve as justice. Meanwhile, inside the dean's office, the dean revealed to two students that some of their peers had been caught using magic carelessly, though fortunately, no one was harmed. Then, turning to a blue-haired girl, the old fossil informed her that one of the students involved was her younger sister Mizuha. The blue-haired girl, Ruka, nodded in understanding and assured him she would handle the situation. The dean then requested that she send his regards to her father, and as she began to leave the office, Ruka reassured the old man that her father would be investing in his school soon. Walking out of the dean's office, the guy tagging along with her, Ruji, a third year, asked what the plan was. Ruka replied firmly, stating that they would have to investigate the matter, and if her sister Mizuha were found guilty, then she would definitely be expelled. Meanwhile, back in class, Inchikami was dying of boredom, his head practically glued to his desk. Nearby, two random students huddled over a phone, simping over some masked dude in the video who they called the Black Mage. Before Inchikami could figure out who this Black Mage that the dudes were geeking over for was, the teacher called Inchikami over and led him to the lab, where a bunch of students were waiting. The teacher announced that those who hadn't been measured last time would now get their turn. At that moment, Mizuha sneakily slipped into the lab like a ninja, silently hoping that this time around, she would finally witness Inchikami's true power firsthand. But before the assessment started, Ruka and Ruji suddenly entered the lab. Seeing them, Mizuha froze in shock, wondering why in hell her sister was in the lab. First to commence the magic assessment was none other than our boy, Inchikami. However, considering that he had destroyed the machine last time, he decided to nerf himself with a suppression spell before slapping his hand on it. This spell left him completely exhausted, and noticing how weak he was, the teacher asked if he was good. But after staring at the machine, the teacher announced that this time, they had managed to get a result. According to the result at the score, Inchikami's magic assessment score was simulated to be 100, and no attribute was found. Hearing this, the students began whispering about Inchikami's low score and lack of attributes, calling it the worst result the school had ever recorded. Meanwhile, Ruka and Ruji exchanged glances before deciding to leave the lab. From their perspective, Inchikami's magic was useless, and there was no way he had soloed Tanado and his gang. But Mizuha wasn't buying that crap result. She knew something was definitely wrong. After all, with a magic score of 100, there was no way Inchikami could have handled the demon soldier earlier. After the magic assessment test, Inchikami spotted Mizuha while heading to class and immediately questioned why she had come. In response, Mizuha casually replied that she was just curious and wanted to check out his powers. Just then, a voice blared out, ordering them to stop. It was none other than Ruka and Ruji looking all high and mighty. Stepping forward, Ruka introduced herself to Inchikami as the eldest daughter of the Uika family. However, after that brief introduction, she completely ignored him and made a beeline for her sister. Crossing her arms, she told Mizuha that she had heard a bunch of delinquents almost beat her up, but she was saved by some bum with a magic power of 100, which she found embarrassing. Flustered, Mizuha hesitated before reluctantly agreeing to the accusations. With that confirmation, Ruka shouted, immediately ordering Mizuha to drop out of the Magic Academy ASAP since she was just a waste of space and tuition fees. Moreover, Ruka pointed out Mizuha's inability to win against her in academics, sports, or magic craft as even more reasons why she should abandon her dream of becoming a mage and simply become a Victoria's Secret model. Hearing this, Mizuha's heart sank. She knew deep down that everything Ruka said was true. She was on the verge of agreeing to quit the academy when, all of a sudden, Inchikami chimed in. Turning to Ruka, Inchikami declared that of all the things he hated, arrogant, spiteful wenches were the worst. Outraged, Ruka demanded that he repeat himself. Without missing a beat, our guy responded, saying she was talking like a parrot, bossing her kid sister around without even considering her opinion. In response, Ruka remarked that this was a conversation between family members, so Inchikami should stop sticking his ugly nose into their business. Unfazed, Inchikami said it didn't seem like a conversation at all. Rather, it seemed like a dictatorship. Furthermore, Inchikami pointed out that even as a family member, it was not in Ruka's place to force Mizuha to give up on her dreams of becoming a mage. Ruka, however, remained firm, doubling down that Mizuha didn't have what it took to become a mage since she was talentless and had never won against her, not even once. Those words hit Mizuha deep in her soul because she knew there was no lie in what her sister was saying. No matter how much Mizuha tried to convince herself otherwise, she knew she would always remain a living, breathing disappointment in the eyes of her family. But at that moment, Inchikami turned to Ruka and declared that Mizuha would surely defeat her, though not now. With a mocking tone, Ruka smirked and challenged them to a 2-on-2 duel in 2 weeks to prove his claim. Noticing a slight hesitation, Ruka taunted Inchikami, asking if he would chicken out after making such a bold statement. Without backing down, Inchikami accepted the duel, and then, turning to Mizuha, he asked if she was down. After nervously hesitating for a few minutes, Mizuha finally summoned the courage and declared that she would also participate. With that decision made, Inchikami stated that everything was settled but laid down one condition. If they won the duel, Ruka would never again boss Mizuha around. In response, Ruka countered with her own condition. If they lost, Mizuha would have to drop out of the academy and register for OnlyFans. With everything concluded, Ruka left, promising to give them the fight of their lives. Later that day, Mizuha invited Inchikami to the school's rooftop. There, she pleaded with him to teach her more about magic. However, Inchikami reminded her that he was just a useless, good-for-nothing mage with a low magic power of 100, and it wouldn't be the best idea for him to be her teacher. Undeterred, Mizuha insisted, saying she knew he was hiding his true power, and was definitely stronger than her. Hearing this, Inchikami paused in surprise for a moment. Noticing his hesitation, Mizuha desperately bowed before him and begged him to be her teacher. Being the first time a baddie begged for his attention, Inchikami agreed but pointed out that she must follow every one of his instructions. Furthermore, he emphasized that she could never quit halfway and had to see the training through to the end, to which Mizuha happily agreed. With that settled, Inchikami said they would commence the training that very day but pointed out a slight problem: the venue for the training. Mizuha thought about it and started blushing as she suggested he train her in her home. Hours later, they arrived at Mizuha's home. Seeing how massive the building was, Inchikami was fascinated. However, Mizuha mentioned that her father was a noble mage, so it was only natural that her family was loaded. Standing on business, Inchikami declared that it was time they commenced training. For starters, he asked for the meaning of magic power, to which Mizuha confidently stated that it was the energy inside the body that was meant to perform magic. Inchikami followed through by asking for the meaning of incantation, to which Mizuha explained that it was the program that turned magic power into magic craft. In addition, Inchikami asked her if it was possible for a person to deliberately increase their magic power, to which Mizuha answered that it was impossible because the limit of one's magic was predetermined at birth. After answering Inchikami's questions like a human Wikipedia, Mizuha was confident that she ate. But Inchikami, stone face, said all her answers were incorrect. Inchikami, thinking, found it hard to believe that in just 50 years, the mages of the world had totally turned dust-brained. So he clarified that magic power wasn't only found in the body, but also in nature. He also explained that incantations were simply tools to back up magic craft, and it was possible for a person to increase their magic power intentionally. Upon hearing this, Mizuha screamed that all he said were all caps. So, to prove his saying, Inchikami instructed her to sit, and then mentioned that he would channel his magic power into her. He instructed her to close her eyes and notify him once she could feel the magic inside her. Placing his hand on her back, Inchikami started to penetrate her inside with his pure aura. However, when he realized she still couldn't feel the magic, he decided to increase the intensity of the aura and go deeper. After a few minutes, Mizuha exclaimed that she could feel an intense hotness on her back. So Inchikami stopped the procedure and pointed out that he had just shown her the magic power perception techniques. Curious, Mizuha questioned if what she felt was the magic power, and Inchikami affirmed it was and advised her always to remember how it felt. In addition, he told her that if she could feel the magic power, she would always be able to detect it anywhere, even in nature. Determined, Mizuha assured him that as the second daughter of a noble mage, she would master the technique in no time. A week passed, and Mizuha cried in despair, exclaiming that she could not continue with the training. Even though Mizuha had been training diligently for a whole week, Inchikami figured that her major problem was her brain. It was running on Windows XP. With that, he decided to pour magic power into her once again. He placed his hand on her back, emitting a bright aura, and then asked her to open her eyes. When Mizuha did as she was told, she shouted that she could see the magic power all around her. Will Inchikami succeed in helping Mizuha win the duel, or is Mizuha about to get radioed out of the Magic Academy? Comment Great Sage if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.